You have moved with such approved style through the contemporary world of thought and of intellectual publicity uh, as Slavoj Žižek. Um, he is the only living human being, I believe, to have an academic journal devoted to the study of his work for the last 15 years or so. Um, his thinking, although refused in some publications, nonetheless, has been uh, oscillating and jostling through the currents of the whole planet at the most headlong rate of a Derby winner for some years now. So, in this sense, I think we're quite justified in treating him as an example par excellence of a concretion or a making particular of Nietzsche's notion of this one who is bringing their own life into that thinking which they have devoted to the pure truth, to saying what the truth is. So let's try to look at an exact instance. So in this, through Zizek's film on the so-called pervert's guide to the cinema, I think the pervert is supposedly, it has something to do with this Zizek saying that the cinema doesn't tell us what to desire, but rather how to desire. There's the example given at the beginning of Joan Crawford staring through the window of a very rather glamorous railroad car, looking through like the, I suppose, like the neoliberal hegemon of today, with the doctrine about the localities, the individual. How do they put that? Locality, I think. I don't remember the exact phrase, but this sort of notion that one should be able to dip into the particular characteristic flavor of any spot on the globe, just like this girl in the pervert's guide, played by Joan Crawford, who is being tantalized by the various species of advanced bourgeois life, let's say 1930s, I suppose. But anyway, but let's focus on this one episode of The Pervert's Guide, which is about the great dictator, the Charlie Chaplin film. So it's very interesting that Zizek either suppresses or even, if we count him to be genuine and honest, and it's more in keeping with the Nietzschean will to power here, that he actually represses it. So it's still there waiting to return according to his Lacanism. So the issue in specific that I'm thinking about is this notion where Chaplin, at the end of the film, plays the music which he had been playing during the rhapsody of the Hitler character, throwing a sort of a beach ball with the globe on it up in the air, like the and not even in the dark sort of Scarface, the world is yours terms of a gangster, but rather in the sense of a dreamer with this dreamy music and this sort of enthusiasm. Everything is about enthusiasm. All of a sudden, we have this wonderful plan before us. And then when the Jewish barber character comes to power and he makes all these remarks that are basically about sort of the English devotion to being good and all this, the same music of the enthusiasm comes up. So I think, and then Zizek suppresses this entirely. That what the whole point of the film was to show that the Englishman is no worse than their cousins, the Germans, because the film was made in like 1939, 1940, before Pearl Harbor, before everything was revealed about the uh, millions, or not, if not tens of millions of murders. So he was still thinking in the terms of here we have Elizabeth II has still the Regina Imperatrix. She hasn't relinquished the empire yet. Are the British really supposed to be better than the Huns and so forth? This is what he's actually thinking. So, but for some reason, Zizek feels compelled to disguise this, and maybe from himself, himself also. But why? It was so the interpretation is so obvious, but he turns to his interpretation of music. Instead, he says, "Oh well, music is something ominous." So he switches it over to his thesis connected to the whole Platonic issue of the poetry, the power of poetry or wisdom making, puts music in the same place as had been done since Palestrina and so on, or Bach, to give a better example of music as an organ in the service of some mission, being Catholicism in that case. So that music could then, it's obvious that music is then used by Chaplin to say, here's two different ideologies. They both create enthusiasm in the people. Everything gets lighter. It's wonderful. And that's what it's for, to conceal keep people, give them something to dream of and not have to look at the reality. So so Chaplin himself says that if he had known what about the death camps and all that, he wouldn't have made the movie, but he had made it earlier. Why doesn't Zizek see Chaplin's obvious real intent? So this is because apparently his predilections, just as Nietzsche says, are coming into his vision, so that he suppresses it, and he doesn't want to know that this other view, which as is obvious, which is connected to, let's say, the general critique of neo liberalism, such as the Clintons and Jeffrey Sachs, and later on the things that have been done in the name of universal human rights with Gaddafi, and with other chaos connected to the so-called Valkyrian of Obama and so forth. So at least there's a strong case which one can make to say that if you do the thing which would bring us into a quartz crystal clear vision, which would be to remove from the picture the unusual cases of the mass murders, but look at all the other cases where the contradiction is still the one that Chaplin sees, and I should also see still the one that Heidegger would see before knowing the outcome of the war. Still the one where there's, for 100 years or so, there's this discussion about the Semites and the Aryans, and they still believed in the sons of Ham, so-called one of Noah's sons, which stands in for the African people and the people in Australia. And there was this discussion about are the Semites better, the Aryans better, and things like this were going on already, but it had nothing of the tone which comes in with the modern usage of anti-Semitism. So I think that's one of the points which has this Nietzschean flavor in the general will of the cave, so to speak, of the current time, which is this, what comes out when you make that move between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and you have this tension which brings it out, where you have a lot of Jews that criticize Israel But then in any other case, that would be impossible because they would be called anti-Semites, right? But they here carve out a distinction so that they can no longer be called anti-Semitists in this case. But I think it shows the general way that that term is a term which obstructs us from having direct vision over the situation, and it's directly linked to those tens of millions of murders. So you could see why it happens, but you can also see that it occludes clear vision. You could then ask, do you want the Platonic lie in there? So I think Zizek actually produces this Platonic lie spontaneously in his thinking, and it shows in that example of his analysis of the Great Dictator in that Pervert's Guide to the Cinema episode. I think we should remember this theme of the prior to the introduction of the Hitlerzeit and murder on that scale when we consider Heidegger's attitude towards these matters in his so-called Black Notebook. So I want to do an analysis of that going forward more in this light where we can see there's a radical shift of the vision, of the way we can imagine reality that occurs because of those issues, but that we should struggle and not allow ourselves to, as Leo Strauss would say, be too squeamish here.